Hello, everyone, and welcome back. It is time now to speak about one of the most powerful drivers of change, and that is, of course, communication. How to communicate the right message effectively, because how we tell the story matters. In a world that needs climate action fast and at scale, messaging can shape opinions, shift behaviors, and really move the needle. So the next panel brings together a group of creative and experienced voices who are rethinking how we communicate with policymakers, businesses, investors, and the public. So please give an energetic welcome to Catherine Ellis, Paul Goodenough, Patrick Ai, Vicky Harden, and leading this conversation, of course, is Anna Gaia, founder of Greenhouse Communication. Let's welcome them on stage.
So, welcome everybody. Oh yes, perfect. Welcome everybody. We're here today to explore how effective communications can really start to change the world. One of my favorite people in climate is David Attenborough, and he said recently that to save the planet now, it's all about communications. No pressure. But interestingly, we have the science already, we have the data, we have the technology, we even have access to the finance if we stop subsidizing fossil fuels. But what we're missing is that commitment from policymakers, a kind of feeling of momentum and a sense of agency that people can actually do this. So communications is often misunderstood or undervalued, but what communications can do is it can literally change policy. It can campaign for a better environment on the policy frameworks. It can scale solutions, and it can also give us a real sense of unity that we're working together and build collaboration across sectors, across countries. So, I am delighted to welcome the most fabulous panel of the whole day, obviously, and they are all experienced creative climate communicators. They have driven narratives and impact on screens, in industry, in boardrooms, and across communities. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you. On the left, we have Paul Goodenough, more than good enough to me, absolutely fantastic communicator, creative, founder of Rewriting the Earth, and a new creative agency called The Giving Agency.
That's right, yep.
And author of the book, The Most Important Comic Book on Earth. Yes, which I love the title. And also just starting working with Leonardo DiCaprio on his latest film.
That's right.
Welcome, Paul.
Thank you.
We have Catherine, who is climate content producer for BAFTA Albert. She was an award-winning TV producer before that, working for BBC, Channel 4, Channel 5, and US stations. Now, absolutely dedicated to making sure that climate content goes into programming. We have Patrick Ai, who is a science communicator, again, award-winning, I have to say. And he is a presenter, an author and a podcaster, so he knows a lot about linking biomimicry and nature to climate change and communicating science. And then last but not least, we have the wonderful Vicky Harding from Mission Possible Partnership, Head of Communications, who actually said she comes from a broad, like a sort of brand and marketing background, a consumer background, and she said this is the most exciting job she's ever had, and it's actually shifting hard-to-abate industries. So looking forward to getting into what makes that so exciting. So first question, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to tell a little bit about their personal story, because quite often that is the emotional connection of why we start what we're doing, what they're doing now, because they're doing some really interesting creative work, and what we can learn from that. So Paul, may I start with you?
Sure. So I basically used to run an agency. So back in the day, what I would do is I'd work with people like Red Bull, BBC, Warner Brothers, and I would try and make digital campaigns that could reach people and generally get them to either buy a product or follow a service. And then about 5 years ago, I started following a lot of environmental people, and it seemed to me on social media that the world was getting better, that policy was changing, business was changing, people were changing. And it gave me a bit of a false sense of optimism, because it seemed to me, with my inside the bubble I was in, that everyone was pushing in the same direction. And then I spoke to my dad and my friends and my football friends, and they weren't getting any of the information I was. And so I thought, well, I come from a background of translating quite complex things into simple, marketable messages. Why don't I try doing that for the planet? And so the first thing I did, which is the book that Anna mentioned, was I tried to bring together a lot of famous names, I guess household names, and then I'd put them in a room, a virtual room, with climate experts, and I would tell their story through comics. And that was a really good way, for me anyway, of taking this really big, ephemeral thing, this great big climate concern, solutions, all that, and taking it down to sometimes as little as 25 words. That book did really well. It also features some people who are in the room. I'm looking at Will over there. And that then spawned me to realize that hopefully I've got a bit of a job to do in this world, which is trying to take all the great things that people like everyone in this room is doing and getting that into the mainstream. Because if we can connect the mainstream and get them to support what you are doing and what we're all doing, then that gives a mandate for policymakers, for businesses, for everybody across the world to do more. We can be a bit more ambitious.
I don't want you to underplay your story, because you did something like 100 hours of Zoom calls, and you got the most incredible influencers involved. Tell us who you got involved in that comic story.
So, yeah, I mean, I need to give a big credit, because a lot of the work that I've achieved is standing on the shoulders of giants. But what we at Rewriting Earth and the new agency, which is a commercial agency, Giving Agency, are doing is we're working with influencers, content creators, people that I'm sure all of us have heard of, and then working with them to basically find the thing they truly care about in a planetary sense, and then elevating it, pulling in charity partners, pulling in creatives who can elevate what they're doing. But to do the list, because I know that's what people are after, there's over 300, but the big ones are people like Leonardo DiCaprio, Taika Waititi, Ricky Gervais, Jane Goodall, Cara Delevingne, ABBA, the McCartneys, the Beckhams, Paul Merson, Gary Lineker, Paula Radcliffe, Carlton Cole. If you go to Rewriting Earth, you'll see there's a whole bunch of them. But what I really, really want to get across to everyone in the room is that the influencers that used to change the world, the names I just mentioned, they're not the influencers who would change the world going forward. A lot of the content creators that we work with now, the TikTokers, the YouTubers, the people who make Instagram memes and comics, their engagement is insanely much better, awful English, sorry, insanely better than that of, say, the Beckhams. So we did a thing with the Beckhams, and it did really well on their channels, but we did a thing with a comic creator who had like 900,000 followers as opposed to the millions, and it absolutely exploded on his channel. So yeah, that's probably enough about me, but I wouldn't mind just very quickly showing a little video that kind of summarizes some of the bits we do. And to give a little bit of a preface, the mission for us was to reach conservatively minded, traditionally minded people in the UK. How do we reach them? How do we get them to engage and recognize that climate change will affect them? And so what we did is we went out and we spoke to real people. I spent a lot of time in pubs, physically talking to everyone from door staff to sex workers and long-time unemployed. And I learned so much about the things that affect their everyday life and the trigger words they have. For example, like climate was a real trigger word. But the one thing that connected all of them was the green spaces in Britain. So yeah, so if you don't mind, I'll quickly show that video.
Why? To draw attention to the damage being caused to sport by flooding and climate change.
I just find with this message is it won't happen in my lifetime. Well, you know, what about our kids and our grandchildren? It's happening already.
Grassroots football is really so important to so many of us that love our sport.
Listen, I've got some great memories at grassroots level. One of them being scoring a worldie.
Grassroots is all about the clubs the volunteers and being available for the whole community.
One, two, three. Say that for us.
Say that for us.
You guys, yes, just to very quickly summarise what that did. That reached over 200 million people across the UK and had either completely positive or neutral coverage in the press, which is very, very abnormal for environmental work. And what it was able to do is show MPs and policymakers that people really cared about their local spaces. So we invited the MPs along so they could witness how much the local folks cared. And that basically, just to sort of share this with the audience, is where my trajectory is going forward. Done a lot of work in the charitable sector and now trying to switch over to the commercial sector as well.
I'd like to say also that Paul runs creative improv sessions, so you can pose a question at him and he'll come up with a solution in just a few minutes. We really wanted to do it here today, but we just don't have the time, but he's available afterwards if you'd like to speak to him. So I'd like to move on to Catherine now, and you're doing some really interesting things at BAFTA Albert. Tell us a little about your story about why you're doing what you're doing and then what you're currently doing with TV producers, embedding it into TV culture.
Yeah, so my background is in TV production, so I worked across factual entertainment and fact-ent, probably more of the latter unless I'm talking to my mum. And I worked in the industry for 25 years. And you asked about the light bulb moment, and for me, probably like many other people, the light bulb moment was Blue Planet. And it was obviously a really powerful emotional story, which made us all realise how terrible the plastic pollution is. But what was particularly interesting for me is how it coincided with policy change. So at the same time, the government would bring in the 5p tax on plastic bags, which obviously is nothing, but no one wants to pay 5p. In many ways, Blue Planet sort of won the hearts, and then the legislation won the minds, and it kind of meant that that legislation sort of went through quite easily, actually, for something that might have had quite a bit of kickback if there hadn't have been this kind of emotional connection with why it matters. So that was kind of big moment for me, I guess. In terms of BAFTA Albert, what we do is we work with the TV and film industry to both do deep decarbonisation off screen. We work with our industry partners, and that's all the names you know: BBC, Sky, Netflix, Warner Brothers, ITV. Oh no, now I've started, I'm going to miss one off. 4, 5, all of them. And yeah, we work with them to basically drive the decarbonisation off screen, but we also work with them to support them in climate storytelling when it's relevant. And actually, it is relevant in a lot of cases as soon as you start taking the word climate off the front of it. We often call our work radical collaboration, which I think is a really exciting phrase of kind of, you know, working together and making a difference. How do we do it? We do it with capacity building, so we do a lot of training. We do workshops on climate content specifically, and also production sustainability. We trained 165 people in workshops this year so far, and we also convene the industry. So we have task forces, we work with our industry advisory groups, we work with the industry to share ideas, shared insights and share problems, and actually it also stops us duplicating because we don't really have the time to all do it separately in silos. And there's lots of lessons from TV and film that I think are really interesting. Succession's a great one. when it aired, I don't know if you know the story, if you watched it, but basically Greg was threatening to sue Greenpeace because his grandfather was going to leave the money in his will to Greenpeace instead of Greg, and Greg decided that he was going to sue Greenpeace because of that. And it was a really small mention in Succession. After it aired that night, Greenpeace got 20,000 searches for how do I leave money in my will to Greenpeace. So there's real impact action that happens off the back of this. Obviously, Mr. Bates is another example. It's a Sin also led to an increase by 500% of requests for HIV testing off the back of it going out. So yeah, we know it has an impact, and we know stories really engage.
So what I love about that is it's actually about transforming a whole system, a sector, and it's right into the heart of living rooms where people are. They don't necessarily know they're being talked to, but it's education and it's behavior change. So it's just very clever what you're doing, and I really admire what you're managing to achieve. So thank you for sharing. So Patrick, you're a science communicator, which is very exciting. We need the science. Tell us a little about your moment of when you decided to do what you're doing and what you're doing now, and what we can learn from that.
Yeah, sure. So I work as a wildlife TV presenter, science communicator, an author. In terms of my journey to becoming a science communicator, that started when I was really young, a number of different kind of aha moments. I like to say that there are two groups of people, two camps of people that really inspired me. On one hand, you had the producers, directors, and writers of science fiction documentaries. So Star Trek and Star Wars, really loved those franchises when I was a kid. And then on the other hand were the producers, directors, and presenters of a little show that some of you might remember called Tomorrow's World. Show of hands for anybody that remembers Tomorrow's World. Yes, okay, cool. We're in great company. So those were the big inspirations for me, and that kind of drew me towards wanting to learn more about science and also speak about it, communicate about it. I also had a moment, actually, one of my biggest light bulb moments was at an after-school science club when we learned how to extract DNA from an onion. Oh. That was fascinating, just like a light bulb moment. Bing! So that all led to me studying for a degree in cancer biology, and then a master's in science communication, and then eventually got my first gig as a runner and edit assistant at the Natural History Unit in Bristol. They make all the big shows like Frozen Planet, Planet Earth, and got to learn from some of the best science communicators and effective communicators in the world. So that was Steve Backshall, Gordon Buchanan, and literally working side by side with David Attenborough, the man, the myth, the legend. So that was an amazing experience. And then got my first gig as a wildlife TV presenter in 2013 with my first debut show, Super Senses, The Secret Power of Animals. In terms of what I'm doing right now, I'm focusing on the world of biomimicry. Again, show of hands, anybody know about biomimicry? A few, okay, cool, awesome, nice. So for those of you that have never heard about that, that's the field of nature-inspired innovations, learning from the natural world. So I think we might have time for two stories. Should we give you quick two stories?
Yeah.
Quick, okay, cool. So the first story of biomimicry that many of you would have actually encountered when you were kids, comes from, to tell that story, we start with a guy called George de Mestral, an engineer, a Swiss engineer. He used to love going for hikes in the Swiss mountains, but the trouble was he'd come back and his trousers, his dog would be covered in these cocklebur seeds. You and I would probably rip off those seeds, okay, chill out, have a cuppa. But he, being an engineer, wanted to find out how this worked. So he looked under the microscope, looked at these seeds, and these seeds had these little hooks on them. And so he was like, okay, what's going on here? He realized the hooks were hooking onto the fibers of his pants, of his trousers, on his dog. And that's when he created his own hook and loop system, which we all know is called, 1, 2, 3?
Velcro.
Velcro, exactly. And so Velcro, which now grosses over $1 billion every single year, all the Velcro brands brings in over $1 billion every year, was inspired by curiosity around sticky seeds. So that's one really cool innovation invention. When we think about sustainability, biomimicry is also playing a great role there. To think about a story that I covered was a guy, or not an engineer, an architect called Mick Pierce. He wanted to create a building that was energy efficient. So he took inspiration from one of our world's most incredible super societies. And I went on an expedition to film this super society in Namibia, and to see that you can't actually see them on the roads, but you can see their handiwork. Huge towering mounds. I'm talking about termites. Now their nest isn't in that whole mound, it's at the bottom, and they have the challenge of recycling air to keep the air fresh and not get stale. So how their mounds work is that the outside of the mound gets really hot, and so the air rises, which means that the air in the central chimney falls down, so you get this cycling of air. And then at night it flips, where the outside is really cool, so the air sinks and the air in the middle rises. And so they're able to passively regenerate or refresh the air every 40 to 90 minutes. Fascinating way of regulating the oxygen in their mounds. And so Mick Pierce, taking inspiration from these termites, created the Eastgate Center in Harare, the capital of Zimbabwe. And when we compare that building to other complexes of offices and malls, it uses 30% less energy in comparison to other similar buildings. So fascinating stories. I guess the question is, can we learn from nature-inspired innovations when it comes to effective communication? Yeah, fascinating.
And can we learn from Patrick as well on how to tell a story? So if people have got innovations, it's really interesting to think through how he's telling that story and the kind of impact he's making. So now, Vicky, I'd love to ask you, you're in a very different sector, heavy industrials, looking at transformation and doing amazing work. Tell us a little about your story, what you're doing now and what we can learn from that.
Well, interestingly, there are some parallels. So I actually studied biology as well, and then ended up moving immediately into communications, and probably not dissimilar to Paul, was working and running sort of agencies, so marketing and advertising space, and working on very, again, well-known brands, so Heineken, Samsung, BMW, things that we all know about. And similarly was focused on building brands, selling lifestyles, and all of those sorts of things. But unlike Paul, I didn't go into comics. I went through a period, again, about 5 years ago, of feeling a little bit like I wanted something different, and it was time for a change. And I literally thought I was going to go into a different career. I was lucky enough to get a scholarship at Henley Business School. So I studied an MBA, which I just found completely fascinating. And really through that process of learning about business and the different facets of business, and also the sort of interconnections with the wider world and different parts of industry and system change and so on, somehow fell back in love with the power of communications, and saw that communications in a completely different light, and saw that actually it was the brief that had needed to change, not my career. And I'm now lucky enough, as you said, I like my job, it's very exciting, but I work on one of the most, I guess, important systemic challenges of our time, which is industrial decarbonisation. And as Anna mentioned, this is about dealing with the what was termed the hard to abate sectors, when we believed that actually, it was really difficult. These were sectors that were, how can we decarbonise them? We're a long way from that, where we now know that the solutions exist and transformation is already happening. So this is sectors like steel, aluminium, aviation, cement, and so on. And my organisation, Mission Possible Partnership, is a independent, not-for-profit. We sort of work globally at a system level, and our mission is around lifting the barriers to unlock investment into clean industry facilities. And if we can get a critical mass of these facilities up and running around the world, we start to change the system. We start to get the markets going for green commodities, and then we enable system change.
So one of the things we've talked about is how you create a vision and a kind of example of what things would look like. One of the things that Vicky's doing is by having these big exemplar projects that is cross-industry sector, cross-country often, they're actually beginning to show that it's possible, which is encouraging others. So just like we had influencers within the citizens arena, when we're looking at businesses, it's often looking at policymakers, investors, and corporations. It's a very different set of messages and a very different ask. And I think one of the things we always do is look for that progression of not just the messages, but what's the call to action? What do we actually want people to do? So I'm going to come on to Patrick just to talk about that. We're going to do a series of questions now for each person. But Patrick, you talked about audience and marketing. So you've learned some things on your way about, I think you call it empathy marketing, which is all about making that connection to people. So do you just want to spend a couple of minutes talking to that? And then I'm going to come on to Catherine to talk about behavior change and how you can actually drive behavior change.
Yeah, so of course I think that in terms of effective communication, storytelling is one thing that is really important. But I think that it goes beyond that, and I think that marketing can really be one of the tools that we use to become effective communicators. And I found it fascinating to look into that world and learn from that world. One of the concepts that I came across was something called empathy marketing. So empathy marketing is a strategy that focuses on understanding and connecting with customers on an emotional level, rather than just focusing on selling products or services. It involves putting yourself in your customer's shoes, understanding their needs, and tailoring your marketing efforts to resonate with their emotions and values. By demonstrating genuine understanding and concern, brands can build trust, foster long-term relationships, and improve customer engagement. So I think that's that's something that we can all take into account and kind of use to become more effective communicators. One concept or one principle that we can use in conjunction with that is something that I came across called the pleasure-pain principle. And the pleasure-pain principle states that as human beings, we're typically, when we buy into something with our time, money, and attention, moving in one of two directions. We're either moving towards a perceived pleasure or away from a perceived pain. Now, most people would definitely buy into something that helps them move away from a perceived pain. So my suggestion is that, if we're trying to make an impact, could we do that by understanding our audiences? What is the current pain or pain point or challenge that they are going through in their lives? Not in a week's time or a year's time or in 2050, right now. And how can we use our product services as vehicles when it comes to sustainability, conservation, energy transfer? How can we use that as a vehicle to help them achieve the transformation that they want to achieve? So there's lots of different frameworks, including copywriting frameworks, which I came across, which I thought was fascinating. I see them as almost communication hacks. There's one called PAS, Problem, Agitate, Solution, and another called ADA, Awareness, Interest, Desire, Action. I think the marketers in the room will be aware of this. I only came across it about a year or two ago. And I thought it was very fascinating, a brilliant way to be able to actually understand how we help people take an action and move forward.
I'd like to build on the pain-pleasure principle, just because that sounded rather fascinating. But I'm often quite confronted by people that come to tell us that we should just be presenting the solutions without actually talking about the facts. And I'm always in two minds about this. And I wanted to say this to Paul, or ask you a question, Paul. We need people to feel a sense of agency, that they can actually do something and that they have control. We do need to inspire them with some sort of vision, but we also need the facts somewhere. So could you just explain to me a little bit about how you've approached it and what your thoughts are?
Yeah, sure. I mean, for me, in the work that we do, what we try and do is really focus down on, as Patrick was saying, the situation the person's in. If you can understand where they're coming from, what their world looks like, you can actually help them to help the planet. I mean, I think one of the big failings we had as an environmental sector is, if you think about comms like you're selling something, we've often tried to be selling people solutions to somebody else's problems. So we're saying, Anna, if you don't do this thing, this person in a far-flung area will benefit from it, or this animal you'll never see, this polar bear will benefit. So that the solution doesn't have an immediate benefit to you, apart from, how you may feel about it. And that's an issue, because the problem is that certain people find it a lot harder to make that creative leap to see the benefit that is being exposed when you're talking about climate and a whole global problem. So we try and find those very, very simple things. So just going back to the Save Our Grassroots, for example, we found that a lot of the people we spoke to from very, very different backgrounds all really cared about the places they went and played football with their dad, or they went walking with their mum, a special tree they had a memory for. Those things are affected, of course, by climate change. But when you say climate, it becomes this big thing. But if you can take it down and say, well, that bit of land over there that means something to you, we can save that. we can work with MP, policymaker, business, whatever, we can save that. So I think for me, it's always about trying to really live and breathe, as Patrick was saying, the life of the person you're trying to speak to, and then finding a way of saying that actually there is a solution and here it is.
Awesome, thank you. Just want to come back to you, Catherine, because I realised I was meant to come back to you before and I missed you out. I'd like to ask you about behaviour change as well. Like, how do you prompt behaviour change, and what's the balance between education on the facts and behaviour change around the solutions?
Yeah, so following on also from what Paul and Patrick have been saying, so we've done some research into how audiences react to TV shows. Sorry, I fell out. Cut out. And one of the really important things is normalising it, normalising the reality, normalising the transition, and normalising the solutions as well. And actually, that means that you can get it from a TV point of view. It fits with so many different stories, and within a business point of view, you can introduce it into loads of different marketing strands. The other thing that I think is important, and it's something that Arnie Schwarzenegger came out and said a couple of weeks ago, is that we should not be talking about climate change, we should be talking about pollution. And actually, as soon as you start flipping it like that, it suddenly becomes a very different proposition. Politics can't really sit on the side of pollution. It doesn't really sit very well. So it suddenly becomes something that's quite non-political. You know, pollution affects all of us in a variety of different ways. And the other thing that we talk about a lot is the business case. We're sort of a B2B, we're sort of a B2B2C. So we often talk about the business case. Actually, it's about viewing figures. It's about return ratings for on-screen stories. It's about them still being relevant in 10 years' time, in 5 years' time. And that's sort of also works across business as well. And one other thing is Richard Curtis Paul was talking about it yesterday, but Richard Curtis is really pushing for an impact producer for TV and film, so that when there are really pertinent stories that could have a difference, that's if you were to engage an impact producer, what could that then mean happens? Actually, Mr. Bates, I don't think did have that. So what would happen if they had as well? And what would an impact producer look like in your businesses? Is it possible to have that? And what would that look like?
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because often we look at what is the impact first. What do you want to create? What's the outcome you need? And then you track back to how then do you define the proposition, research your audience to see what's going to move them, find out about the channels, and then measure that impact. And it is more complex than storytelling. Storytelling is really important, but the art of communications is the entire process. Vicky, I'd love to come to you on a much more difficult subject, as always. We are facing hideous headwinds at the moment on climate change. We've got Trump and all his horrendous activities in the US. We've got denial coming out. We've got green hushing really happening now on a bigger scale. In some ways, isn't this the time to sort of double down on communications, to invest, to actually make sure we're getting the story and the message across? And how do you feel about that? You're working with members and businesses. What's your take on the situation, and how should we react?
I'd say firstly, just recognizing that we are in a different world than we were in 6 months ago. There is a lot of fear. There is a lot of uncertainty. And we need to recognize that because we're all feeling it. And then I would say we need to separate the signal from the noise. There is a lot of noise thrown out there on purpose to create fear and uncertainty. So one of the first things I worked on when I came into Mission Possible Partnership, along with colleagues, was to translate a tool that the analysts internally were working on, which is tracking the progress of industrial decarbonisation, tracking the investments into clean industrial plants globally across all sectors, at all investment stages. Hugely complex piece of work. And it's now publicly available, but it shows the state of the transition. It shows what's actually going on, not just what the noise is saying. And I think it's, again, really important to look at the facts and to look at the trends and where you're seeing the bright spots. And we need to lean into those because they are happening, and they're probably happening in really surprising places. The world is shifting. And the other thing I would say, and it's been talked about a little bit, and I guess I'll just sort of reframe it slightly, which is we need to move from talking in reductive to productive language. We need to do messages that cuts through. So my job is about connecting like technical insights into the hearts of minds of really diverse audiences, investors who are going to put up $3 billion for a green steel plant. They're not going to move just because it's urgent, even though we think, you know, people should act on a moral basis, but they don't. So we need to move to more productive language that's going to cut through. And the other thing we need to do, and again has been sort of referenced, is to look for the opportunities to do this. So look for the opportunities in what the solutions that we're here to provide. An example of this is last week with the energy conferences that were taking place here in London. The renewable sector is talking, and there was a half-page ad in the Financial Times. Energy security is renewable energy. These messages we have to be much bolder about claiming, and I think we've been a little bit reluctant to do so. We've had a jolt in the last 6 months. We need to stand up and we need to claim the opportunities that these solutions are here to provide.
Fantastic, thank you. We've just got a few minutes left. I just wondered if you could just pass on maybe your 2 or 3 top tips from the work that you've done of what you would like to share with the audience. Maybe we start with Paul.
Sure. So for me, I think the one that we found has worked really well is the ability to use social media to get to places that you can't do through more traditional marketing means. And work with content creators, because there's an authenticity when you're working with somebody who's already creating that type of content, who may already be going through the types of problems or solutions that you're talking about. So it's great, and I'm not deriding it, but I think the celebrity era is starting to crumble a little bit, and I think that's being reflected in a few sort of news reports recently, is that people, when they see a big celebrity who's got millions talking about problems, we know that's not their problem. But if you can find those people who speak to the hearts of the people you're trying to reach, those trusted messengers, like you were saying earlier, like we use Paul Merson on one of ours. Even though, yes, he has money, he didn't come from money, so he has been through some of those problems. So I think that would be one of the things that I'd suggest to all of you, and to find people on your team who can really hook up the businesses, the business work you're doing with maybe charitable partners, because if you're trying to deliver impact, that's not your core business often. You know, you're trying to scrap around and catch up almost. Well, there's amazing charities out there who would die for your funding and could do a lot with it. They're already set up to do this type of work. So I'd say, yeah, 2 things: harness the power of social media and find yourself charity partners.
Thank you. Catherine?
I'd say 3. 1, don't mention climate. 2, push the business case. Actually, people want to know what the opportunity is. And the third one is radical collaboration. Who can you collaborate with that will help drive change faster and stop duplication?
Thank you. Patrick?
For me, it comes down to 2 things: great storytelling, great content through fantastic storytelling and marketing. I think one of the interesting ways of thinking about why stories are important, how I see it, is that, again, from a scientific point of view, as human beings, we're always trying to move towards a perceived pleasure or away from a perceived pain. But the catch to that is that we're trying to do it with the least amount of energy possible. And so what stories do is that they time compress experience and information in a way that's really easy for people to take in, like in a little amuse-bouche, a little hors d'oeuvre, right? So that's the importance of a great story. It gives people lessons that are learned and earned in a time-compressed format. So I think great stories, of course I'm biased, nature-inspired innovations, I think is a great way to get people's awareness and interest. And then tapping into the power of marketing. For me, one of the areas that I'm quite interested in is direct response marketing. And that's by getting people to see a piece of content and actually engage with it, enjoy it, and then take an actual action. If you're looking for people to follow or to get more insights from, the 3 people I would recommend are Russell Brunson, the founder of ClickFunnels, Dr. Myron Golden, he's got a fantastic YouTube channel, I would highly recommend that. And then lastly, the Think Media podcast that's run by Sean Cannell. So if any one of you 3 are watching this, appreciate it.
And all of us, of course.
Yeah, of course. Vicky.
I'll do 2 very quickly. We've talked a little bit about in reference to it that, you know, we often talk in echo chambers, that audiences are talking to each other. And one thing that we're founded on is this idea of partnership. And for us, it's about building a really, really strong network. Find the people who can get into the rooms that you can't, and especially when you're dealing with something like system change. And the second thing is something that was relayed to me by a well-known environmentalist that we're working with. He said, this is too big, and this is too important, so make it big. Don't minimize it. Don't hide behind technocratic language. Make it big.
Fantastic. So that draws us towards the end of our session. I hope you'll agree that communications is a real lever for change. It can obviously educate, it can inspire, it could also scale solutions, it can change policy. So don't underestimate the power of communications. And when we think about it, everyone in this room has a role to play, whether you're in the boardroom, whether you're looking at finance and investment, whether you're looking at solutions or communities, we all have a role to play to understand the power of communications and to make that work. And I think if we do it with clarity and purpose, rather than just reflecting the world that we're in, we can actually begin to shape the world we want to see. So I just want to leave it there to say thank you so much for our wonderful panelists. It's been a pleasure. And thank you all for attending. Perhaps we'll give them a round of applause.